Nathaniel Carter ran his fingers over the envelope, his name printed in crisp, formal lettering. Isla Thornton. His jaw clenched. He was really going to do this. "Are you sure about this?" A deep voice came from across his office. Nathaniel didn't look up. He turned the envelope in his hands, weighing the gravity of the decision he was about to make. More than ever, his best friend and business partner, Caleb Morgan, exhaled and sank into the chair opposite him. "Why do you still torture yourself with her? Your wedding is in 2 weeks. Lauren is everything a man like you could ask for." Nathaniel let out a humorless chuckle. "This isn't about torture, it's about closure." Caleb shook his head. "No, you don't want closure. You want to watch her suffer." Nathaniel didn't deny it. He wanted to see the pain in Isla's eyes. He wanted her to watch him stand at the altar with another woman and realize, too late, that he was never going to be hers again. With slow, deliberate movements, he took a pen and signed the invitation with finality. Isla Thornton, personal invitation. He handed it to his assistant. "Make sure she receives it today." The assistant nodded and left. Caleb let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "This won't end well." Nathaniel smirked, cold and sharp. "Not for her." Isla ran her fingertips over the edges of the invitation, the elegant gold lettering standing out against the ivory paper. Nathaniel Carter and Lauren Sinclair, together in holy matrimony. Her stomach twisted. "That son of a bitch. How you don't have to go." A voice pulled her out of her thoughts. Standing in the doorway, arms crossed, was Ethan Mercer. Isla let out a slow breath, setting the invitation down on the table. "Oh, I'm going." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Why?" She reached for the glass of wine on the counter, taking a slow sip, a smirk playing on her lips. "Because if Nathaniel thinks he can play games with me, then he's about to learn I know how to play too." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "He's going to hate you for this." Isla met his gaze, unwavering. Good, because Nathaniel Carter's hatred was the only thing that kept their fire alive. The vineyard estate was bathed in golden light, its sprawling grounds filled with high-profile guests clinking champagne glasses and exchanging practiced smiles. Everything about Nathaniel Carter's engagement party was meticulously planned, perfectly controlled. And yet his pulse was anything but steady. His sharp blue gaze flicked toward the entrance, an unspoken expectation pressing against his ribs. She would come. He knew it. And then, like a carefully timed twist of fate, it happened. A small commotion at the entrance sent a ripple through the crowd. Nathaniel turned slowly, even though he already knew who had arrived, and when he saw her, his entire world narrowed. Isla Thornton stepped into the estate with the kind of presence that demanded attention. She was still the same damn vision. That same sharp confidence in her stride, that same fire in her gaze. But it wasn't just her appearance that made his grip tighten around his glass. It was him, the man at her side. Tall, charismatic, familiar. Ethan Mercer. Nathaniel's fingers curled so tightly around his whiskey glass that he nearly shattered it. Isla had not only shown up, she had brought another man. At his own damn engagement party, Lauren, his fiancée, stood beside him, oblivious to the war that had just ignited beneath his skin. "Nathan, you look like you've seen a ghost." He forced himself to blink, his face a mask of calm, even as his blood roared. "Nothing, just someone I didn't expect to see." Lauren followed his gaze, her face lighting up in polite recognition. "Oh, Isla, isn't it? I didn't realize you'd be attending." Isla's red lips curved into a knowing smile as she walked toward them, her fingers casually resting on Ethan's arm. "Nathaniel was kind enough to invite me," she said smoothly. "I figured it would be rude not to attend." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Rude is one word for it. Ethan extended a hand, his grin annoyingly effortless. "Ethan Mercer. A pleasure." Nathaniel took his time before shaking it, his grip firm, just a little too firm. "Nathaniel Carter, I know who you are." Their eyes locked. A silent battle. Isla watched with veiled amusement, sensing the tension radiating off Nathaniel. Lauren, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing, let out a soft laugh. Isla, I had no idea you were coming with someone. Isla turned to Ethan, her touch on his chest deliberate, slow. Oh, I never travel alone. Nathaniel saw red. His control was slipping and Isla knew it. She always knew. Nathaniel took a slow sip of his whiskey, rolling the liquid on his tongue before speaking. So, Ethan, how exactly do you and Isla know each other? Ethan smirked. You could say we go way back. Nathaniel's teeth clenched. Isla tilted her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. Oh, come now, Nathaniel. I'm sure you didn't invite me just to ask about my date. Nathaniel exhaled sharply through his nose, giving her a look that could burn through steel. Lauren let out a soft chuckle, glancing between them. Isla, darling, you must tell me who designed your dress. It's absolutely breathtaking. Isla smiled. Thank you, it was a custom piece. Nathaniel's gaze dragged down her body, and damn it, he hated how much he still knew every inch of her. The red silk clung to her like a second skin, the high slit revealing far too much leg. Ethan leaned in slightly, whispering something against Isla's ear that made her laugh. Nathaniel nearly cracked the damn glass in his hand. Lauren was pulled away by a passing acquaintance, and for the first time that evening, it was just the three of them. Nathaniel took a step closer, lowering his voice. This is a new low, even for you. Isla feigned innocence. Whatever do you mean? Bringing a man to my engagement party? Do you really think this little game of yours is going to work? Isla lifted a brow, tilting her head. Game? I just came to celebrate your happiness, Nathaniel. Isn't that what you wanted? His hand twitched at his side. Yes. He had wanted her to see him happy, but he had never expected this. He had never expected to feel this. Ethan leaned back, watching them with an easy, knowing smirk. If you two need a moment alone, I can step away. Nathaniel's gaze snapped to him. That won't be necessary. Isla let out a soft laugh, stepping closer, just enough for Nathaniel to catch the intoxicating scent of her perfume. Relax, Nathaniel, she murmured. It's just a party. But they both knew that was a lie, because nothing between them had ever been just anything. Nathaniel's grip on his whiskey glass was tight, his knuckles white. Isla was testing his limits, and she was enjoying every damn second of it. Her lips still held that smirk, that dangerous smirk, the one that used to drive him insane in bed, and now it was driving him insane in an entirely different way. He had expected her to show up. He had expected her to react. What he hadn't expected was for her to bring someone else. His gaze flickered to Ethan Mercer, the man who had his hand on Isla's waist like he had any right to touch her. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, forcing himself to keep his composure. If she wanted to play games, he would make sure she lost. Camilla's voice cut through his thoughts. Nathan, let's dance. He blinked, pulling himself back into reality. His fiancée stood beside him, her smile warm, her hand extended. Isla was watching. Of course, she was watching. Nathaniel smirked. Of course, sweetheart. And just like that, he had his counterattack. The music changed, deep and slow. Nathaniel led Camilla onto the dance floor, his movements calculated. Every touch, every glance, every motion, because he knew Isla's eyes were on him, because he wanted her to feel exactly what he had felt. He slid his hand down Camilla's back, fingers brushing lower than necessary. He leaned in, his lips near her ear. You look stunning tonight. Camilla shivered slightly at his tone, mistaking it for affection. But it wasn't for her, it was for the woman watching from across the room. Nathaniel met Isla's gaze as he twirled Camilla effortlessly, and he saw it. The moment she faltered, her smirk tightened, her fingers curled slightly. It was subtle, but he knew her too damn well. She felt it. She hated it. Good. But Isla never lost for long. Nathaniel watched as she turned to Ethan, placing a delicate hand on his chest, and then she leaned in. Her lips brushed his ear, a soft whisper, her body pressing into his in a way that made Nathaniel's jaw clench. Ethan chuckled, his hand sliding lower on her back. Nathaniel saw red. He tightened his hold on Camilla, but his body was moving on pure instinct now. The anger was there, the fire, the hunger, and Isla knew she had him. So she escalated. She took Ethan's hand and led him onto the dance floor, and that was his breaking point. Nathaniel didn't think, didn't plan. He just moved. 1 second Isla was dancing in Ethan's arms. The next Nathaniel was there, right in front of them. His gaze locked onto hers. His voice was low, controlled. "Dance with me." Ethan barely had time to react before Nathaniel was already pulling Isla away. She didn't resist. She never did. Because despite everything, she still burned for him. The second their bodies collided, it was over. Nathaniel's hand gripped her waist. Isla's breath hitched. The music slowed, but the heat between them was unbearable. His fingers brushed against her bare back, his touch burning against her skin. "Still love playing games, Isla?" His voice was a dangerous whisper. She smiled, but he felt the way her chest rose and fell too quickly. "You're the one who invited me, darling." Nathaniel leaned in, his lips grazing her ear, just enough to make her shiver. "And you're the one who couldn't resist coming." Her fingers slid into his hair, tugging just enough to make his control slip. "You still think you own me, don't you?" Nathaniel's grip tightened on her waist. "You still think you don't." Their gazes locked. The moment stretched. The heat. The fire. The damn ache. And then, the song ended. The spell broke. And yet, his hand remained on her waist. Her fingers remained tangled in his hair, because letting go had never been their thing. Nathaniel felt the heat of Isla's body even after. The dance ended. Her touch lingered like a brand on his skin. He should have let her go. He should have stepped back, but he didn't. Not yet. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the entire room faded away. The past. The pain. The desire. It was all right there between them. But then a voice shattered the moment. "Nathan?" It was Lauren. His fiancée stood at the edge of the dance floor, her expression soft but laced with uncertainty. And just like that, the spell was broken. Nathaniel released Isla, his hand dropping away from her waist as he turned to Lauren. Of course. But as he walked away, he felt Isla's gaze on his back, hot and unforgiving. She wasn't done, and neither was he. Nathaniel took Lauren's hand and led her back into the heart of the party. The music shifted to something lighter, more upbeat, and for a while he played the role of the perfect host. He was charming, attentive and affectionate, but every time he glanced over his shoulder, he saw her Isla standing by the bar, her body angled toward Ethan, her lips curved into that infuriating smile. His blood boiled. "You're distracted," Lauren whispered, her fingers tightening slightly on his arm. Nathaniel forced a smile. "Just thinking about the future." He lied smoothly. Lauren's eyes softened and she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "It's going to be perfect." Nathaniel's gaze flicked back to Isla. He wasn't so sure about that. As the evening wore on, Nathaniel found himself slipping further into frustration. He watched as Isla laughed with Ethan, her head thrown back, her fingers lingering on his arm. She was too close, too comfortable, too much. He couldn't take it anymore. Crossing the room in long strides, Nathaniel didn't care about the curious glances from the guests. He was a man on a mission, and his mission was simple. Take back control. He stopped in front of Isla, his eyes burning into hers. "Can I have a word?" Ethan stepped in, his body slightly shielding Isla's. "You've had enough words tonight, don't you think?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "This doesn't concern you." Ethan smirked, crossing his arms. "See, that's where you're wrong. You walked away, Nathaniel. You let her go." Nathaniel's gaze snapped to Isla. "Is that what you think, that I let you go?" Isla's smile didn't reach her eyes. That's what it felt like. The tension was unbearable. Nathaniel took a step closer, his voice low. "We need to talk. Alone." Isla tilted her head, her gaze never wavering. "Fine." They moved to a secluded corner of the estate away from prying eyes. The silence between them was heavy, filled with things neither of them wanted to say. Nathaniel was the first to break it. Why did you come? Isla folded her arms, the silk of her dress clinging to her curves. You invited me. You know that's not what I meant. She laughed softly, the sound more bitter than amused. Why did you invite me, Nathaniel? Why did you want me here to show me how happy you are, to rub it in my face? Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. You think that's what this is? You think I wanted to hurt you? She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. Isn't that what you always do? His hands flexed at his sides, the urge to touch her nearly overwhelming. You think I haven't been hurting too? Isla's breath hitched, her composure slipping for just a moment, but then she straightened, her expression hardening. You made your choice. You're marrying her. You're moving on. And I'm doing the same. Nathaniel closed the distance between them, his face inches from hers. If you were moving on, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be with him. Isla's lips parted, her breath warm against his skin. Maybe I'm just here to see if you can still handle losing. Nathaniel's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Be careful, Isla. You're playing a dangerous game. She leaned in, her mouth brushing against his ear. It's only dangerous if you're afraid of losing. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, everything else fell away. Nathaniel wanted her, wanted to crush her against him, wanted to erase every doubt, every lie, every twisted game they'd played. But he couldn't, because he had made a choice, and now he would have to live with it. He stepped back, releasing her wrist. Enjoy the party, Isla. She watched him go, her eyes shadowed with emotions she refused to name, because letting go had never been their thing, but tonight it had to be. Nathaniel's breath was uneven. His skin still burned where Isla's body had pressed against his. Her scent still lingered in his head like a drug he couldn't shake. She had pushed him too far, and now she was going to pay for it. Without another thought, he moved. He crossed the estate with long, determined strides, ignoring the whispers and glances of the guests. He wasn't stopping. Not until he reached her. He found Isla near the bar, her fingers delicately wrapped around a champagne flute, her lips curved in that infuriating smirk. She saw him coming, and she didn't look away. Before she could say a word, Nathaniel grabbed her wrist, not hard but firm enough that she knew. Come with me. Her eyebrow arched, always testing him. And if I say no? His voice dropped lower, his fingers tightening slightly around hers. Then I take you another way. Isla's lips parted, her breath catching for just a second. That was all he needed. He pulled her through the crowd, leading her away from the glowing chandeliers and laughter, away from prying eyes. He didn't stop until they were inside one of the private suites of the estate. The door shut with a soft click, and then silence. Isla leaned against the door, watching him with hooded eyes. So dramatic, Nathaniel. Anyone would think you were jealous. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair before stepping closer. You know exactly what you're doing. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. Do I? Nathaniel's hand landed on the door, right beside her head, caging her in. His voice was low, rough. You always do. She shivered. He felt it, and that was his breaking point. Nathaniel crashed his mouth against hers, his controls snapping like a rope pulled too tight. Isla's gasp was swallowed by his kiss, her hands flying to his shirt, gripping him as if she needed something to hold on to, like she had been waiting for this just as much as he had. His fingers tangled in her hair, his body pressing her against the door as their lips moved in a desperate, punishing rhythm. This wasn't gentle. This wasn't love. This was war. His hands roamed over her body, memorizing every inch of her like he had never stopped knowing her. He slid his lips down her neck, nipping at the sensitive skin just beneath her ear. Isla moaned softly, her body arching into his like a reflex. Still think I let you go? He murmured against her throat. Her fingers dug into his shoulders. You're marrying someone else. Nathaniel froze. For a second, he could hear the sound of his own breathing, feel the rapid beating of his heart against his ribs, and just like that, the truth hit him. What the hell was he doing? He stepped back abruptly, his chest rising and falling. Isla remained against the door, her lips swollen, her dress slightly disheveled, and her eyes filled with something dangerously close to regret. But she didn't move. Neither did. For a moment, they just stared. Then Nathaniel's voice came out rough. "This can't happen again." A slow, knowing smile tugged at Isla's lips. "Of course it will." He exhaled sharply, stepping back again, his hands flexing at his sides. "Damn you, Isla." She tilted her head, her voice soft but unwavering. "You already have." Nathaniel could still taste Isla on his lips. His breathing was uneven, his pulse erratic. This was wrong. He shouldn't have touched her. He shouldn't have kissed her like that. Like she still belonged to him, but she did, didn't she? No. He clenched his fists, forcing his mind back to reality. He had a fiancée. He had a future that didn't include Isla Thornton. Then why the hell couldn't he walk away from her? Nathaniel turned on his heel, running a hand through his hair as he tried to collect himself. But just as he was about to leave, a voice stopped him cold. Interrupting something. Ethan Mercer. He was standing in the dimly lit hallway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. The bastard had seen. Isla straightened her dress, recovering faster than Nathaniel would have liked. "We were just talking." Ethan's gaze flicked between them, clearly unimpressed. "Sure, talking." Nathaniel stepped forward, his patience dangerously thin. "What do you want, Mercer?" Ethan let out a slow breath before meeting Nathaniel's stare with something close to pity. "We need to talk." Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. "We have nothing to discuss." "Oh, I think we do." Ethan shoved his hands into his pockets, his voice calm. "Too calm. It's about your father's will." The air between them changed. Nathaniel's entire body went still. "What the hell are you talking about?" Ethan exhaled, and then he dropped the bomb. "You and I are brothers." The world tilted. Nathaniel could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He stared at Ethan, waiting for him to take it back, to say it was some kind of twisted joke. But Ethan's expression didn't change. "What the fuck did you just say?" Ethan crossed his arms. "Your father, Robert Carter, had a secret, one he took to his grave." Nathaniel's throat went dry. "You're lying." "No, I'm not. And if you don't believe me, I have proof." Nathaniel felt the ground shift beneath him. This couldn't be real. His father, the man who had raised him, the man whose legacy he had spent his entire life protecting, had been hiding another son. A son who now stood before him, unapologetic. A son who was about to take half of everything Nathaniel had ever fought for. Nathaniel forced himself to focus. Does Isla know? Ethan hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer Nathaniel needed. She knew. She fucking knew. Nathaniel inhaled sharply, his mind racing. The betrayal burned, hot and unforgiving. "How long?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "She's known for a while." Nathaniel let out a short, bitter laugh. Of course, Isla had known. She always knew the things that could break him, and she had chosen not to tell him. Ethan studied Nathaniel's face, waiting for his reaction. "Look, I didn't ask for this either, but we need to talk." Nathaniel clenched his jaw, his hands balling into fists. "The only thing I need is for you to stay the hell out of my way." Ethan shook his head. "That's not going to happen." Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice dangerously low. "Then you'd better be ready for a war." Ethan didn't blink. "I've been ready for a long time." Nathaniel's pulse hammered in his ears. Isla knew. The woman who had been in his bed just minutes ago, the woman who had kissed him back like she still belonged to him, had known that Ethan was his brother, and she hadn't said a damn thing. His grip tightened at his sides. He wasn't sure if what he felt was anger, betrayal, or something far worse. Maybe all three. Ethan didn't move, watching him with that annoying patience, like he was waiting for Nathaniel to explode. Nathaniel clenched his jaw. "If you think I'm just going to accept this, you don't know me at all." Ethan smirked, but there was something sharp in his eyes. "Though I know exactly who you are," Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice deadly, "then you should know that I don't lose." Ethan held his gaze, unmoved. "You already did." Nathaniel turned abruptly, pushing past him without another word. His thoughts were a storm. his body still vibrating with everything he had just learned. But all of that vanished the moment he stepped back into the ballroom. Because there she was, dancing again. Not with Ethan this time, with someone else. Some meaningless extra. Some fool who had no idea that the woman in his arms was playing a game she had already mastered. Nathaniel's blood boiled. She was testing him, and she would get her answer. He moved toward her without hesitation. Isla sensed him before she saw him. Her body tensed, and then he was there, right in front of her. Nathaniel didn't say a word. He just extended his hand. "Dance with me." Her partner hesitated, looking to Isla for guidance, but she didn't move, didn't speak, because she knew. She always knew. With slow, deliberate grace, she placed her hand in his, and the moment she did, the game reset. Their bodies moved in perfect sync, because no matter how much time passed, no matter how much they hurt each other, this was the one thing they had never lost. The way they fit together, the way they fought through movement. Nathaniel's grip on her waist was firm, possessive. "How long?" Isla blinked up at him, her expression unreadable. "How long what?" His fingers tightened slightly. "How long have you known?" For the first time that night, she faltered. Just a second, just a flicker, but he caught it. "Nathaniel," his voice was ice. "Don't lie to me." She exhaled slowly, letting her gaze flicker away for a brief moment. And then, finally, "Long enough." Nathaniel let out a sharp breath, his control hanging by a thread. "You should have told me." Isla tilted her head, her expression laced with something unreadable. Would it have changed anything? Nathaniel stopped moving, because deep down, he knew the answer. No, it wouldn't have. It didn't change the past. I didn't change them. The music ended, but their bodies stayed close. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away, because no matter how much they lied, no matter how much they pretended, they were still each other's greatest weakness. The music had stopped, but Nathaniel hadn't let go. His hand remained firm on Isla's waist, his fingers pressing into the silk of her dress, as if daring her to move first. But she didn't. She just stared up at him, her breath shallow, her lips parted, waiting. Lauren's voice sliced through the thick silence. "Nathan?" Nathaniel released Isla like she had burned him. The moment shattered. The tension snapped, and Isla smirked, because she knew she had won this round. Nathaniel turned to his fiancée, schooling his expression into something neutral. "What is it, sweetheart?" Lauren glanced between him and Isla, her brows drawing together slightly. "They're making a toast." Nathaniel nodded once, turning away from Isla without another word. But even as he walked away, he felt her eyes on him. He didn't have to look back to know she was still smiling, because she had gotten exactly what she wanted. The dinner went by in a blur. Nathaniel barely heard the speeches, barely tasted the food. His thoughts were elsewhere, on her. On the way she had looked at him, on the way she had felt in his arms. And then, just as he was about to drink away the mess in his head, she did it. She kissed Ethan. Nathaniel's grip on his glass tightened. It wasn't even a long kiss, barely a whisper of lips. But it was intentional. It was for him, and she knew he would react. Nathaniel didn't think, didn't plan, he just moved. He pushed back his chair and strode toward her without a second of hesitation. Isla barely had time to lower her glass before he reached her. She lifted an amused brow. Jealous? Nathaniel ignored her. He wasn't playing tonight. His fingers closed around her wrist, his grip firm, but controlled. "Come with me." She sighed, dramatic and unbothered. "And if I don't want to?" He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "Then I'll take you another way." He didn't wait for her response. He didn't give her the chance to argue. He pulled her through the estate, weaving past guests until they reached a dimly lit corridor. And when they finally stopped, when he finally had her alone, Nathaniel pinned her against the wall. His hands slammed down beside her head, his body pressing dangerously close. Her breath hitched. He smirked. "You don't get to walk in here with another man and kiss him in front of me." Isla tilted her chin up defiantly. "Why? Does it bother you?" Nathaniel's fingers ghosted over the slit of her dress, sliding up the soft skin of her thigh. Her pulse jumped. His lips curved against her ear. "You tell me." She inhaled sharply, her hands fisting at her sides, fighting herself, fighting him. But then, just as he was about to push further, she did something he didn't expect. She grabbed his tie and pulled him down, and kissed him. The moment their lips met, everything else disappeared. There was no wedding, no Ethan, no past, no future. Just this, just them. Nathaniel kissed her like he was starving, like he had spent years waiting for this moment. His hands gripped her hips, pulling her flush against him, pressing her back harder against the wall as his mouth devoured hers. And Isla let him. She melted into him. She arched into his touch, and when he slid his fingers up her thigh, pushing the fabric of her dress aside, she didn't stop him. His mouth moved down her throat, teeth grazing, tongue soothing, claiming, and she moaned his name. Nathaniel froze. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and in that moment, he knew. She was still his, just like he was still hers. They had never let go, and maybe they never would. Nathaniel should have walked away. He should have fixed his tie, straightened his jacket, and left Isla standing against that wall with the taste of him still on her lips. But he didn't. Because, even as he pulled away, he could still hear her moan his name, still feel the way she trembled beneath his hands, still taste the lie she had told him, "I don't love you." Back in the ballroom, the guests continued celebrating a wedding that would never happen. Lauren was nowhere to be seen. Ethan stood off to the side, watching with an expression Nathaniel couldn't quite read. But none of it mattered, because Isla was still standing in front of him, lips swollen, dress slightly wrinkled, her breath still uneven, and Nathaniel knew. She wasn't ready for this to be over. Neither was he. Then, just as he was about to say something, she kissed Ethan. Right there, in front of everyone, not a deep kiss, not passionate, but it was enough to remind him that she had always known how to destroy him. The whiskey glass in his hand nearly shattered. His jaw tightened. The guests noticed. The whispers started. And Isla, that infuriating woman, smirked. She wanted him to react, and Nathaniel never disappointed. He pushed back his chair and strode toward her. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't break eye contact, because this had never been about Ethan. It had always been about him. Nathaniel grabbed her wrist, ignoring the way people turned to watch. "Come with me, now." She arched a brow. "Or what?" He leaned in, his voice dangerously low. "Or I'll make you regret testing me." He didn't wait for a response, didn't care about the stares. He just pulled her away, weaving through the crowd until they were alone again. And the moment the door shut behind them, Nathaniel lost it. He backed her against the nearest wall, his hands caging her in. What the hell was that? Isla tilted her head, mocking him. A kiss. His hand slammed against the door beside her, his body pressing closer. "You know what I'm talking about." She smiled. "And you know why I did it." Nathaniel exhaled sharply, dragging his fingers down the slit of her dress, teasing the sensitive skin beneath. Her breath hitched. His smirk returned. "Say it." She clenched her jaw. "No." His lips brushed against her throat. "Say it, Isla." She shivered, but still she refused. Nathaniel grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Do you still love me?" Her lips parted. For a second, just a second, he thought she might say it. But then, her eyes hardened. And she smiled. "No." Nathaniel laughed, cold, sharp, unbelieving. Liar, she didn't deny it, because they both knew the truth. Then, just as Nathaniel was about to say something else, the door burst open, and standing there, face pale, was Lauren. Her eyes flickered between them, between Nathaniel's hand still gripping Isla's chin, between Isla's swollen lips and the flush of her skin. And then, understanding dawned. The silence was deafening. And then, without a word, Lauren picked up a glass of champagne and threw it in Nathaniel's face. The entire ballroom went silent. All eyes were on them, and Lauren, voice shaking, just laughed bitterly. "You are such a fucking bastard." Then she turned on her heel and walked away. and Nathaniel let her go because he had already lost her. And he didn't care, because the only woman he had ever wanted was still standing in front of him. The night was in ruins. Nathaniel's engagement was over, his carefully constructed life shattered. But he didn't care, because the only thing that mattered was her. He stormed through the estate searching for Ela. The whispers followed him. The stares burned into his skin. But all he could think about was how she had destroyed him all over again, and how, despite everything, he still wanted her. Then he saw her, standing outside the estate under the soft glow of the garden lights. Her dress was still slightly wrinkled, her lipstick was slightly smudged, and she looked like every mistake he had ever wanted to make again. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He moved, pushed open the doors and stepped out into the rain that had started to fall, cold and unforgiving. She heard him. She turned, and when their eyes met, the storm inside him only grew stronger. He stopped just inches from her, his voice rough. "You ruined me." Isla's lips parted, but she didn't speak. The rain soaked through her dress, the fabric clinging to her curves, her hair sticking to her damp skin. She looked too beautiful to be real. Nathaniel's fingers twitched at his sides. "Say it," she exhaled shakily. "Say what?" His jaw clenched. "Say that you don't love me." The air between them grew impossibly thick. The storm raged around them, but it was nothing compared to the one in his chest. "Say it, Isla." She swallowed hard, her throat working. But no words came, because she couldn't lie to him again. Nathaniel exhaled harshly, his body thrumming with frustration, with anger, with longing. "You can't, can you?" Her hands balled into fists. "Nathaniel." But he shook his head, stepping closer, his fingers grazing her wrist. Even now, even after everything, she still leaned into his touch, she still belonged to him. "Tell me you don't love me," he whispered, his voice raw. Her breath hitched, her lips trembled, and then finally, "I can't." That was all he needed. He grabbed her, his hands tangled in her wet hair, pulling her forward, crushing his lips against hers. Isla gasped, her fingers clutching the front of his shirt. The rain poured down, cold and relentless, but neither of them felt it, because the only thing that mattered was this: the heat, the hunger, the truth. Nathaniel's hands roamed down her body, gripping, memorizing. Isla arched against him, her moans swallowed by the rain and the desperation between them. His lips moved lower, trailing fire along her soaked skin. And when she whispered his name, he lost himself completely, because no matter how many times they tried to walk away, they always ended up right back here, together. The kiss slowed, but he didn't let her go. His forehead pressed against hers, their breaths mingling, their hands still gripping. Nathaniel smirked. "You always did like a dramatic exit." Isla laughed, soft and breathless. "And you always come after me." Nathaniel's grip on her waist tightened. Always. The storm had passed. The wedding was ruined. But Isla was still here. And Nathaniel? He wasn't letting her go this time. They sat in his car outside the estate, rain dripping from their clothes, their breaths still uneven. Neither of them spoke, because what could they say? That this had been inevitable? That they had always known it would end like this? Nathaniel ran a hand through his damp hair, exhaling harshly. "You're not running this time." Isla turned to him, lips still swollen from his kiss. "Neither are you." His fingers flexed against the steering wheel. He should feel guilty for Lauren, for the mess he had made, for the war brewing between him and Ethan. But he didn't, because Isla was here, and she was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Before either of them could speak, Nathaniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, Ethan, his stomach twisted. The last time they spoke, Ethan had dropped the biggest bombshell of his life, and Nathaniel still hadn't processed it. But he answered anyway. "What do you want?" Ethan's voice was calm. "We need to talk." Nathaniel clenched his jaw. "I don't think we do." Ethan let out a slow breath. "This isn't about you and Isla." Nathaniel's grip tightened on the phone. Then what? There was a pause. Then Ethan's next words changed everything. "It's about the inheritance." Nathaniel's body went rigid. "What about it?" Ethan's voice was steady. "Our father's will. Half of the empire belongs to me." Silence. A long, suffocating silence. Nathaniel's stomach twisted. Half of his family's company. Half of everything he had spent years building. Half of his legacy. Taken. He let out a sharp laugh, bitter and cold. "You're fucking joking." "Wish I was." Nathaniel ran a hand down his face, forcing himself to breathe. This couldn't be real. His father had never told him. And now, he was supposed to share everything with a man he had just met. A man he hated? Nathaniel's voice dropped. And Isla knew. Ethan hesitated, and that was all the answer he needed. She knew, and she didn't tell him. Nathaniel turned to Isla. Her expression was unreadable, but he saw it. The guilt, the regret, and that hurt more than anything. "How long?" Her throat bobbed. "Nathaniel," his voice hardened. "How long have you known?" Her eyes flickered away. "Long enough." Nathaniel let out a slow breath, his entire body thrumming with restrained anger. He didn't speak, didn't move, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what to do. Because this wasn't just about the will. This was about trust, and Isla had just proven that she had none in him. Ethan sighed through the phone. "Look, man, I get it. You're pissed." Nathaniel's grip tightened. "That doesn't even begin to cover it." Ethan continued, his voice even. "You don't have to like me, but we're family." Nathaniel scoffed. "We're not family." Ethan's voice dropped. "Then let's just be enemies." A pause. Then, "But just so you know, Isla isn't your enemy." Nathaniel glanced at her. She hadn't looked away, even now, even with everything crashing down around them. She still stayed. That had to mean something, didn't it? Nathaniel inhaled sharply. "Forget her," he said into the phone. Ethan was silent for a moment, then he sighed. "She doesn't want you to forget her." Nathaniel clenched his jaw. "She should have thought about that before she lied to me." And then he hung up. The car was silent. The rain had slowed, but neither of them moved. Then Isla finally spoke. "Nathaniel." But he didn't answer, because he didn't know if he could. The silence in the car was suffocating. Isla sat beside him, motionless, her hands resting on her lap, her fingers twitching slightly. She was waiting for him to say something. But Nathaniel just gripped the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the storm inside his chest. She had known. She had fucking known. And now, with Ethan claiming half of his empire, with everything he had built slipping through his fingers, Nathaniel had never felt so lost. Isla finally broke the silence. "Say something." Nathaniel exhaled sharply, turning his head to look at her. His gaze was sharp, unreadable. "What do you want me to say?" She swallowed. "That you understand." Nathaniel let out a short, bitter laugh. "Understand? That you kept this from me? That you stood there night after night pretending there was nothing to tell?" Isla's throat bobbed. "It wasn't my secret to tell." His hands tightened around the wheel. "Bullshit." Her lips pressed together. Would it have changed anything, Nathaniel? He stared at her, feeling something deep in his chest crack, because he knew the answer. No, it wouldn't have changed a damn thing. He still would have hated Ethan. Still would have wanted to fight for what was his. Still would have ended up here in this car, with the only woman he could never let go. And yet, she had still lied. Nathaniel let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "How you should have told me." Isla's voice was barely a whisper. "I know." He shook his head, exhausted. "So what now?" She inhaled deeply, turning to face him fully. "You tell me." Nathaniel's jaw clenched, because he didn't know. He didn't know if he could forgive her. Didn't know if he could forget. All he knew was that he couldn't lose her again. She must have seen it in his face, because slowly, hesitantly, she reached for his hand. Nathaniel didn't pull away. Isla's fingers laced through his, her grip firm, like she was grounding him. Like she was saying, "I'm still here, and maybe." That was enough. Nathaniel turned his hand over, holding hers back. His voice was low, almost hoarse. "You drive me insane." Isla smiled, small and knowing. "You make it too easy." He exhaled, shaking his head. And then, without another word, he kissed her. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate, it was slow, deep, and filled with everything he hadn't said. Isla melted into him, her fingers gripping his jacket, pulling him closer. Because this was it. This was the truth. No matter what had happened, they always found their way back to each other. When they finally pulled apart, Isla rested her forehead against his. Nathaniel let out a breathless chuckle. "This is a terrible idea," she smirked. "You love terrible ideas." His fingers tangled in her hair, his smirk mirroring hers. "Yeah, especially this one." The morning sunlight spilled through the windows of the Manhattan penthouse, casting long, golden streaks across the tangled sheets. Nathaniel Carter sat on the edge of the bed, a cigarette between his fingers, his gaze fixed on the city skyline. Behind him, she stirred. Isla Thornton. His greatest mistake. His greatest obsession. The only woman he had ever truly loved. She stretched lazily, her body still bare beneath the sheets, her voice laced with sleep. "If you like that, I'm not kissing you for the rest of the day." Nathaniel smirked but didn't turn. "Is that a threat or a challenge?" Isla moved, sliding her arms around his waist from behind, her lips brushing against the bare skin of his shoulder. "Take it however you want, Carter." Nathaniel chuckled, exhaling slowly before snuffing out the cigarette, because as much as he craved nicotine, he craved her more. He finally turned, and the sight of her damn near stole his breath. Her hair was messy, her lips swollen, his shirt draped over her shoulders, barely covering anything. "You're still stealing my clothes, Thornton." Isla smirked, stretching her arms above her head, the movement making the shirt ride up. "You keep leaving them out." His gaze dragged down her legs, slow and deliberate. "You're impossible. And yet here we are." Nathaniel reached for her, pulling her into his lap. Isla straddled him with ease, her fingers sliding into his hair, her smirk softening into something deeper. "Something real. You spent years trying to hate me," she murmured. Nathaniel's fingers traced along her spine, his voice low. "And I failed miserably." Isla leaned in, her lips hovering just over his. "So what happens now?" Nathaniel smirked against her mouth. "Now? You're stuck with me?" She laughed, soft and breathless. "Sounds dangerous." His grip on her hips tightened. "You love dangerous things." She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. "Only when they're worth it." And just like that, he kissed her. Slow, deep, unyielding, because no matter how many times they had walked away, no matter how much damage they had done, they were always going to end up here, together. Love and hate, passion and vengeance, desire and destruction. Nathaniel and Isla were never meant to be simple. Their story wasn't about fairy tales or happy endings wrapped in a neat little bow. It was about fire, about obsession, about the kind of love that wrecks you and rebuilds you all at once, because some connections can't be severed. Some people enter your life not to bring peace, but to bring chaos. To challenge you, to break you, to set you on fire and make you crave the burn. Maybe that's why we find ourselves drawn to stories like this, to the ones where love isn't easy, where emotions collide instead of align. Because deep down we know the truth. The most unforgettable love stories aren't the perfect ones. They're the messy ones, the reckless ones, the ones where the heart and mind wage war, where lovers turn to enemies and then back into something even more dangerous, something inevitable. Now tell me, have you ever loved someone you tried to forget, but never could? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. If this story made you feel something, share it. Let others experience the fire. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to follow. Because love this intense always leaves a mark.